धर्मक्षेत्रे कुरुक्षेत्रे समवेतायुयुत्सवः.
What happened to Arjuna 5,000 years ago happens to some people even now and today. The emotional breakdown, emotional setback, emotional collapse, whatever you say, he was a high-functioning individual. And he had discipline, he had good training, and he was resilient, but still he broke down. We'll ask this question to our special guest today, Professor George Manning. And before we go into any questions, just want to introduce George Manning to the people listening here. Professor George Manning is a professor emeritus now. He's professor of psychology, but he's also has been a consultant and to many companies and corporations and executives. And he recently wrote a book, Lifetime Lessons in Consulting. It's a great book. And also his greatest contribution, in my view, is the Art of Leadership, which he's got the 8th edition coming up. And there are some interesting topics that I want to tell about Art of Leadership, but he also has written a book which is just simply called Stress. The point I wanted to tell about Art of Leadership is his 8th edition is coming. And we have had some conversation about some leaders from the East and how some people formed characters like Chanakya. So I think Chanakya has a place in that book, Art of Leadership, that's coming out, 8th edition. George, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just to say that getting to know Krishna has been eye-opening for me because, like most Americans in the Midwest, we're Buckeyes, Ohio, born and raised. We don't know a lot about the rest of the world compared to the rest of the world knowing about America. And we tend to be raised in a, demographically speaking, Judeo-Christian orientation. And so we just don't know a lot about the East. And when you think about the East, you think about lots of people and lots of history and tradition. And in the area of right living and especially, fulfilling one's potential and especially being a good person, the East has so much to offer, I've learned from Krishna. The very first thing I did before I met him, I read his book, Life After Life, and it was really interesting. And it would be to all people raised in the West who weren't exposed to the thinking of Hinduism, for example. So it's been a good learning experience for both of us, I think, to share our upbringings and what we've been taught and how we think, coming from the roots being from the East world, sociologically, culturally speaking, and the roots being the Western world, in my case, sociologically and culturally speaking. So talking with you today, Krishna, is very enjoyable to me. And I hope that what the subjects we cover will be interesting and useful to anybody listening.
No, thank you. I'll come back to the question, is that how do these high-functioning people, can they also have breakdown, and why should emotional crisis happen to them? I mean, do you have any thoughts about, from the psychology point of view? I mean,
Well, first of all, let's talk about what stress is. Stress is physical and emotional wear and tear on the organism, of the human organism, coming from problems that we have, caused by self or caused by others. The kinds of problems fall into categories of pressures, conflicts, frustrations. Now you take a person like a hero figure. In our society, it'd be somebody like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, and in the Hindu world, it'd be somebody like, well, you name them. And
Arjuna.
yeah, and they would be a heroic figure. And probably they've run into a lot of pressure, a lot of conflict, a lot of frustration. They've had to cope with it. So that requires coping skills. And even the most developed person, can get to the point of being overwhelmed and breaking down, so to speak, physically or emotionally breakdown. So it can happen. What they tend to do, though, is they've got these coping skills they've got support so that they can handle a lot of pressure, a lot of conflict, and a lot of frustration, and live to tell about it. Back to the West and the East, if you think about leaders, for example, who could have had more stress to deal with than George Washington during the Revolutionary War, or another great example, Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. The pressure, the conflict, the frustration that they had to deal with was enormous. Now, they had good coping skills to survive it. Theoretically, you get to the point where even, Superman, along comes Krypton and he breaks down. So let's just talk about Washington, for example. He would be one who disappeared for a while. And they said, well, where is he? And he just had to get away from it and be alone in order to not break down and stay strong. A great example of a modern leader people know about is the Israeli Prime Minister of the past, Golda Meir, who was in the thick of all sorts of pressure, conflict, and frustration, including war. And she would say, I've had enough. And she would have to be alone and have coping techniques that she would use. And we could talk about some of those.
George, no, that's wonderful. You can cope yourself. But in Arjun's case, there was Krishna as a support person, as a coach. So do you see a role of a coach, or, how do you see, you have been a consultant and a coach all your life, and you have helped other people. Have you had any situation where you had to help people through and support? And you shared an example about someone else yesterday when I was talking to you, Steve. In these moments, I feel that, whatever help you need, somehow, if you are open to it, arrives to you. But what is the role of a coach or a consultant in these situations? If Arjun came to you, what will you do?
There's that old saying, you get people where they are and help them if you can to achieve their potential and be healthy and fulfilled and fulfilling of others. There's always the role for teachers and helpers and coaches. When we all think about the past in our own lives, we think about a person who was taught you the most about life because of the way they were or what they told you. That's how people change other people, is they be a way that the person wants to be, or they give them information or skills or training to be effective. At any rate, you always think about upbringing. It might be your grandmother and the way she was, or it might be your uncle and the way he was, or your big brother, or your mother. Well, there's the past that helps us, and then along comes, life, and maybe something happens, and you were doing real well, and then you crash and burn, and there's a place for people to help you then, and be a good coach. The example I was giving you, there's a fellow that I've known for, as he was a student in the 70s for me, and his story was that he was a big man on campus, so to speak, in high school. He would play football and he'd go both ways, so to speak, offense and defense, and he was bright. He really was reinforced socially, that his ego was fulfilled. Then he went to college, and that freshman year, he wasn't the big man on campus anymore, and he had the need for ego need that we all have, and circumstances made it that how he was fulfilling his need was with drugs, and he got into drugs. Now, this would have been in the 70s, early 70s, and used them to the point that he described a day, a night, when he was at the bottom. Imagine somebody in an alley with the garbage cans. And along came a teacher, Jane Dodson, who saw, she could read his situation, and she knew that he needed help. And she reached out, much like a mother would, and brought him into her influence. The kind of influence in terms of teaching him and growing him as a sophomore, that whole sophomore year. Well, it was good seed, so it grew to nice high corn. And by the time I met him as a junior, he was back on top in terms of fully functioning. But his whole life ahead of him could be great if he kept that up. And so others would mentor and teach him, and he's lived a tremendous life devoted to others ever since his junior, senior, graduate, doctoral life, and he's been a teacher to others. But this wonderful Jane Dodson, she's cut from the cloth of Helen Keller. Jane was older, and she was blind when she met Steve, and she saw there was a need, and she reached out. Steve didn't. She reached out. But, helping other people is a good thing, and for the person who's doing the helping and the person being helped. And so, major figures in history are products of their teachers and products of coaches and friends. There's a doctor who wrote a book, The Checklist Manifesto, and wrote a book about complications. He's a very great doctor, writer type, and he gave a talk about coaching. So he could use coaching. He said that he was noticing that his surgery, it just wasn't what it was when he was younger. So he thought, well, they've got, in sports, they got diving coaches, and they've got quarterback coaches, and they've got pitching coaches, and so I'm going to get a coach. And he turned to his previous professor of surgery, asked him to watch him. And he watched him do surgery. And then in the coaching session, that professor, the coach, had 25 things that he saw that would should have been different, that would improve the quality of the surgery. And there were things that he had fallen into bad habit that had to do with, where his arm was, and had to do with different things that could be fixed by a good coach. So he's come to the conclusion, and I agree, that people can always use someone who will give advice and help you fulfill your potential. Now, when you talked about, now that's normal, and that's work. But what if this same fellow had an emotional breakdown because of loss of family member, or had an emotional setback because he didn't achieve some goal he had, and to help him through that, he would have to have individual coping skills, and it's always helpful to have someone else who cares and takes the time to listen as you sort things out, and then as you come to your own conclusions, and as you go forward, it could reinforce the positive things that you're doing as a coach. But in the final analysis, it's always up to the individual. When the coach is gone, what does the person do?
So, George, I hear three things. One is the coach or whoever is there is listening very well to the person. The other is he can see things more clearly compared to the person who is emotionally entangled. So there is clarity in what he can, the coach can see, or the consultant can see. And the third is the guy should be open to it, open to doing things, and not just open to listening, but taking into action. So I think those three things that you pointed out through a story is really very helpful to people who are listening, and to me as well. So, you have written this book, Art of Leadership. Is there any kind of emotional mastery that a leader needs? Or have you come across in your coaching or consulting where people get emotional, and how do you kind of handle that part of leadership?
How about psychology for a second? The study of why people do what they do, the father of it as a discipline is William James, and there's this tradition in psychology that deals with, what's not only abnormal, but what's normal, what's not only deficiencies and problems, but what's growth and development. And the years go on, and different people contribute in that area. Famous names people would know about in American psychology would be Abraham Maslow or Gordon Allport, people like that, Paul Rogers. Famous names in Europe would be Viktor Frankl, people like him. But the years go on, and here we are in the last number of years. There's a fellow who coined the term emotional intelligence, and Daniel Goldman, and wrote a book about it, and wrote a book about social intelligence, and he was talking about the same thing, personal, interpersonal competence. And his idea of someone who's emotionally intelligent is someone who is aware of their own emotions and is in tune with the other person's emotions. And not everybody's aware of their own emotions or pays attention to them, listens to their body, or is aware, attuned to what's going on around them. You know, who's in trouble, who needs you. The other two aspects of it is of emotional intelligence is to be able to manage your own emotions. That's one. And the other is to manage the relationship. So the four angles of this Goldman's emotional intelligence is self-awareness, awareness of others, self-management of emotions, and managing the relationship. And so people who got this emotional intelligence, it helps them personally, and they can help others and in their challenges in life. So leadership, it helps if you're an emotionally intelligent leader. In life, it helps if you're an emotional intelligent liver.
No, thanks. That's a very clear-cut description you gave about emotional intelligence and how it applies to leadership. So one of the things I wanted to hear, especially the young people listening here, is emotional breakdown or setback. It's not like it used to happen, it doesn't happen now. It happens now. But the intensity of it, when it happens, and the person involved in it, is really quite kind of astounding when it happens to you. I mean, when it happens to me or something. And you shared one of your stories in the past when you were young. I think that will be very helpful to people listening at this podcast. So I would like to hear that, and also how does it feel when you are there?
Well, there's a saying that nobody gets through life stress-free. And sometimes
Nobody gets through life
stress-free.
Stress-free, okay.
There's going to, in every life, some rain must fall. And sometimes you're the cause of the problem, sometimes the problem comes to you. But it's a crisis, so to speak. And young adults, or all adults really, they've got two big problems to solve. To be have peace of mind and fulfilled and happy. One is love, and the other is work. They've got to find their calling, and they've got to have love in their life, according to Freud and according to all people who've studied people. We're in pursuit of occupation and positive relationships. So you take young people, adult people, those are two challenges of life. Well, I think I was telling you the personal story. I graduated and was in a master's program, and I was probably about 21 or something like that. And the typical 21-year-old fellow is interested in partnerships, boys, girls, boys, and so on. So there was a young lady at Ohio University who I liked a lot, and vice versa. And I was more serious than she was, evidently. I wasn't sure of that until I went over to meet her at a certain time in the morning from Cincinnati to Athens, Ohio, at the library, and she wasn't there. She wasn't to be found all day. Lunch, afternoon. Finally, we connected at her sorority house, and it was just as apparent as could be that she was not interested in me or anything like that. And so the typical person feels crushed, and I was typical and felt crushed. And so as I drove back to Cincinnati, that river road is very foggy, and it's dark, and it it just went through my mind, this is terrible. Life isn't worth living. And I ought to just crash this car into this culvert. And that actually went through my mind. And that I didn't do it. And by the time I got home, I was still crushed, but I wasn't quite so crushed. And the next day, crushed, but not quite so. And a few days went by, and this intensity of breakdown, so to speak, went away. And that personal experience has always helped me with young people thereafter. They're going to have crises of love relationships. They're going to have crises of not making an honor roll or not getting the job that they wanted or something like that. And, the pain will go away and they'll have learned from the experience. But in a crisis, for a person, here's some help. Besides, being patient, because the pain will go away, but here's some help. The Chinese have a symbol for crisis, two characters. One character means danger, the other means opportunity. And so what hardy people do, what George Washington would do, what Abraham Lincoln would do, what the great hero in India would do, is they'd recognize the reality, there is a crisis, but then they would not let it kill them, but they would accentuate the positive. What are the opportunities here? So instead of focus on danger and setback, they focus on opportunity and advancement. There's a famous guy, Charles Swindoll, who talks about these kinds of subjects and in America and has for years. And he said life is 10% what happens to us and 90% our reaction to it, our attitude about it. And so a hardy person sees things for what they are, but then they, including the setback or the crisis they're in, whether it's interpersonal or occupational, but then they accentuate the positive and going forward.
So 90% is the attitude. I mean, that's a good take-home message that, it's important to have a positive attitude. George, is there anything called positive stress?
Well, the person who has credit for explaining this subject of stress is Hans Selye.
Yeah.
And he defines it as wear and tear on the organism. Well, that can be from a negative thing, a funeral, and it can be from a positive thing, a wedding.
Yeah.
It can be from the wear and tear can come from a battle you lose and also from a battle you win. And so somebody would say, well, there is such a thing as positive stress. And just by virtue of the fact we're alive, we're going to be wear and tear, and we just want it to be as much positive as possible. And if negative happens, learn from it.
Right.
Or prevent it as possible. That brings me to these coping skills or attitudes. We have to realize that after basic biology, what will define a person's life, whether it's the big leader like the Indian, how do you pronounce his name?
Arjuna.
Golda Meir or anybody else, Queen Elizabeth of yesteryear or Benjamin Franklin, is one, the things that we tell ourselves that we believe. Some people self-talk themselves into diminished lives. Some people self-talk themselves into great lives. They'll say, you got your problems, but In the name, you are okay. 2 is the people we're around. So a great coping technique in times of setback or stress is who we're around. And I know in the case I gave you of Dr. Dodson, she helped the student. There's a saying, and I think it's true, that we become, at a degree it's true, we become the average of our 5 best friends. And at any point in time, and because we're social beings. And so the message is to surround yourself with good and positive people and be that way for others. Krishna, you were that way for me. You were a very positive influence on my life. So surround yourself with good people who become the average of our 5 best friends. And the other coping thing is the books you read and what you put into your brain. And so, you know, as you think, you feel, and as you feel, you behave, and it's a cycle upward or downward. But good books, good media, good sayings, good lectures help you to deal with setbacks, as opposed to the poisonous input. That
I think, George, you gave the key takeaways here. We started with the topic, yoga of despondency, which is kind of can break through, come out of breakdowns. And I think the 2 important points you mentioned is you are an average of 5 best friends, and you are also influenced by books you read. So, the company you keep is important. The books you read or how you use your mind is important. I think next session we are going to talk about Krishna, how Krishna brings clarity to Arjuna. Krishna is clarity, clarity is Krishna. So that is the best way I can describe him in one sentence, that he was clarity of purpose, clarity of thoughts, and clarity of action. And he knew what was needed to be done. He knew the thoughts behind it and what, like, books to read or how do you train yourself in that way. And then, of course, what was the action item. So that we will discuss in the next episode. Thank you, George.
could I add
Please do.
helpful?
Yeah,
Krishna, could I add something that might be real helpful along the lines
please
of
do.
books? If a listener hasn't read these books, they would be great helps to them along the lines you discussed. One is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. The other is The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews. And the other is The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score by a person from Holland, a Dutchman, Van der Kolk. Well, those are books that can help your
We will put those in the link, and that way people can find out about it.
धर्म क्षेत्र और कुरुक्षेत्र में मन को मोह का शूल मिला है।